Thank you. My apologies.
No worries. So like I said, I'm a fourth year doctoral student in the clinical psychology program at IUPUI, which is in Indianapolis. Basically, my research interests broadly focus on improving the quality of care for mental health care for individuals with severe mental illness. And I typically look at this from the consumer level, the provider level, and the organizational level. So basically, today we're going to talk a bit about the organizational level when we talk about turnover and employee retention efforts within the mental health workforce. I have been involved in a project examining turnover and employee retention within the mental health workforce for about the past year. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about today. And my clinical interests are also within sort of this severe mental illness realm and recovery within severe mental illness. I spent the last year on an acute mental health inpatient unit, so definitely have seen a lot of co-occurring substance use and things like that. But yeah, so that is a little bit about me. So let me advance the slides here. Oops. Okay. So basically, briefly, what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to go over a little bit of background about my research, and then also talk about staff turnover and kind of the scope of this problem in our field and the impacts that it has. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what the research shows about why people might leave their organization. And then we'll also talk more about how retention is different than turnover. So a little on the theory of retention. And then we'll discuss a project I've worked on and I'm currently writing a paper on about why people stayed at a particular community behavioral health setting. And then I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about so what are the practical implications? So what can you do back in your own organizations to sort of make a difference in employee retention? Oops. So before we get started, I just kind of want to get a sense of who is in the room with us. So if you could just kind of share in the chat, maybe what your job or role is and how long you've been there. That would be really helpful for me to sort of understand, who I'm speaking with today. Let's see, is the chat function available to you guys? Oh, I just see it. Cool. Awesome. Great. Thanks so much for sharing. Looks like we have supervisors, project managers, a variety of years, 3 years, 15 years. That's great. Awesome. So, like I said, I'm a fourth year doctoral student in clinical psychology. Prior to graduate school, I did some research in schizophrenia and social cognition. However, when I came to graduate school, I kind of transitioned more to that applied research realm, kind of looking broadly at improving the quality of mental health care for those with severe mental illness. And like I said, kind of at the consumer level, the provider level.
Problem solved quite quickly here because of
Let's see. Looks like someone isn't muted.
Got it.
Okay, cool. And let's see here. So yeah, looking at it at the organizational level. And like I said, my clinical focus is recovery within severe mental illness, which also includes co-occurring substance use disorders. My mentor is Dr. Michelle Salyers, and she does a lot of research within psychiatric rehabilitation for severe mental illness. But I also did want to mention, she also does quite a bit of research on staff burnout and intervention and training to kind of mitigate burnout within the mental health workforce. She has a lot of research out on an intervention that she helped create called Breathe. Maybe some of you have heard of it. If not, I really encourage you to kind of look into that, and feel free to email me to get some of that information if you're interested in kind of techniques to help reduce burnout. I wanted to start kind of by talking about how do we define staff turnover. So turnover in the dictionary is defined as the number of persons hired within a period to replace those leaving or dropped from our workforce. And this time frame is typically within a year. So when we talk about the average turnover rate, we're typically talking about the how much turnover occurs within 1 year at the organization. And we also see a number of words associated with turnover, like the word upset and shakeup. And this kind of insinuates or brings up this idea that turnover can cause chaos in an organization. However, there's another type of turnover, kind of from a biological standpoint. So in this dictionary definition is the continuous process of loss and replacement of a constituent, such as cell or tissue, of a living system. And although this is kind of like the biological definition of turnover, I think it can be helpful in conceptualizing turnover within organizations as well, because we can kind of conceptualize the organizations as this living system made up of individual workers. And so through that, we can kind of think of turnover as this natural process, right? And this natural process that can be good sometimes. However, when it becomes too much, when you have too much turnover, that's when the negative consequences start to kind of take hold. So how much turnover do we have within the mental health workforce? So it depends on the study that you look at. Maybe one study is looking at a particular community mental health center, and in those studies, maybe it might be higher than the overall average. But on average, the behavioral health care has 30 to 35% turnover annually. So basically what this means is for every 3 people in your organization you have today, 1 is going to be gone in your organization in a year at least. So for some people, that might seem like it's relatively high, but looking at other industries, it could be a lot worse. So kind of doing that downward social comparison, in the retail and hospitality industries, we have turnover rates, over 70 to 100%. So yeah, I think while ours is relatively high, it could be worse. However, it is a growing problem within the mental health workforce. Maybe some of you have kind of heard about the Great Resignation that was going on during the pandemic and kind of continues to be an issue. And we've seen kind of these unprecedented rates of quitting across industries. So some statistics from the US Bureau of Labor, 47.4 million people quit their jobs last year. And this is compared to people who left their jobs in 2019, which was 42.1 million. So as you can see, there's been a big increase there. And then it's still relatively high with just in June, 4.2 million quits. So how much turnover do you think that we should have within an organization? Do you want to put some guesses in the chat of how much turnover you think is considered okay within mental health workforce or in an organization in general? Looking for a percentage, 15. Any other guesses? 20? Yeah, so we have some 20%, 15%. So the general recommendation is that we have about 10% turnover in the organization. So you guys were pretty close. And ideally these would be from lower performing individuals that are leaving the organization. So why don't we want 0%, right? Why do we want some turnover within an organization? So turnover does have some positive effects when it is balanced, right? So turnover does bring in new people with new ideas and new energy. Some research suggests that teams that have been together for a long time tend to get into groupthink. So they agree with each other. they're not going to rock the boat so much. So having new people come in and bring these new ideas and energy can be good for the organization. However, a lot of turnover can be bad. So trying to find a replacement person, so recruiting and hiring costs can be high when you're trying to find that replacement, hiring them and then training them. So training in terms of just training for the job, but then also if you're doing like an evidence-based treatment, you might have to do that fidelity training, which can be a lengthy process. It also just creates burden on the remaining staff. So who's going to cover for the person that left, right? Typically you don't, hire someone else immediately after someone left. There is mixed research on kind of how turnover affects client care. We tend to think that it would be bad based on treatment outcomes, right? If there's more turnover in the organization, treatment outcomes may be worse for clients. But research has shown it may not affect client care as much as we thought, but there is definitely less continuity of care. We can really see a burden to the client in terms of having to, re-explain their story to another provider or reestablish a relationship with a new provider, which can really definitely affect the working alliance between patient and provider. So maybe indirectly affecting some of those treatment outcomes. So before I go over sort of why people leave organizations, I did want to share a quick poll with you just to give you an idea of what some typical questions look like and when we're measuring turnover and tension. So I am going to launch this poll so that hopefully everyone can see it. So the questions are, how often have you seriously considered leaving your job in the past 6 months? And don't worry, these are anonymous, so I won't be able to see anyone's specific answers. But how likely are you to leave your job in the next 6 months? So we have some mixed responses. A lot of nevers, a lot of once every few months, some people several times a week. It really just depends. So we have quite a few broad range of responses. So I wanted to share these polls with you because these are the types of questions that we ask in research when we're measuring intent to leave. So when we talk about turnover intent, this is kind of what we're talking about. So having thoughts about leaving, not necessarily leaving the organization, right? Oops, let's see here. And so one study that a faculty member in the School of Social Work that I work with did, he measured turnover and tension as well as actual turnover. And so kind of measuring thinking about leaving as well as whether or not the person actually left and kind of predictors of both of those constructs. And so what he found was that when people are thinking about leaving, that's closely related to things like job stressors, more emotional exhaustion in the job, having work-home conflict, less job satisfaction. So those were all kind of predictors of having thoughts about leaving. However, there was a difference between the things that predicted having thoughts about leaving and then the things that actually predicted actual turnover. So actual turnover tended to be more personal. So these predictors were people who were younger, had children under 5, so maybe suggesting some conflict between work and childcare. Also, people tended to be earlier in their career, so they had less education and experience. And this could kind of be a normal learning experience, kind of trying to move around and figure out, what they want to do in this organization or in this workforce. Just, when you're first starting out, you're kind of trying to figure out what you're interested in, or it could reflect kind of this generational difference between what was considered acceptable in job longevity versus what's acceptable now in today's workforce. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And another finding that they found was that was kind of counterintuitive to what you might think, is that actual turnover was actually predicted by people who are less likely to have worked overtime. So when you think about actual turnover, you think, oh, people are burnt out, they're working all the time. But in this case, we found people were less likely to have worked overtime. And what this could potentially mean is that people who do work overtime are kind of highly committed to that organization because they're working more, and that creates more kind of internal commitment to the organization, which maybe leads them to be kind of more embedded in that organization and less likely to leave. So that was a little bit about turnover. And finally, after about 100 years of research and why people leave, the field is really starting to focus more on retention and kind of why people stay at their job. And so I'm going to transition into kind of talking about employee retention. So one of the first theories associated with why people stay at organizations is called job embeddedness theory. And researchers in this area kind of got together and identified that oftentimes reasons for why people stay in an organization are not just the opposite of why people leave. So there can be different motivating forces for each. For example, kind of imagine that you consider leaving because you feel like you have poor job security. However, you ultimately decide to stay because you've developed support among coworkers and you have a lot of flexibility in your job that you would possibly have to give up if you left. So these reasons for leaving and reasons for staying are kind of two separate things, and they're not just two sides of the same coin. So job embeddedness talks about on-the-job forces and off-the-job forces that factor into how embedded we are into our current jobs. So some of those forces that it talks about, it kind of differentiates on-the-job forces into three different factors. So first we have links, which is the formal and informal ties within your organization. So that can be things like having social support among coworkers, friends at work, kind of that social capital that you have within your organization. The second one is fit. So that is kind of how compatible you are with your organization, how your values align with the organization's values. And then the third one is sacrifices. And this is kind of what you would be giving up if you chose to leave. So this could be something like your benefits, like health insurance, or it could kind of be something like self-image, like, if I lost this job, how does this affect who I am and how I see myself? And so off the job forces, we kind of talk about family and community as having their own embeddedness. So you may be in a community that has very few options for behavioral healthcare jobs. So your partner has a position there. So you feel kind of obligated to stay in that area, which makes you kind of maybe feeling a little stuck at the organization almost. You can also have a lot of family in the area, so you don't want to leave the organization or the area because you have a lot of family ties. And so that's kind of what we talk about when we say off the job forces. And these things can interact with each other, off the job and on the job forces, to kind of create this network or web that embeds you in your organization. Let's see here. So it's only been in the last 10 to 15, maybe 10 to 20 years for research on stayers to really grow. And not much has been done in terms of the behavioral health workforce. So one study that we found that was kind of related to this was on why people might stay. And they looked at social work in child protection and welfare services in Ireland. And they defined stayers at the organization as people who stayed there for 10 years or more. And they found that factors related to job embeddedness, so the links, fit, and sacrifices, were present in these interviews with individuals who had stayed at the organization for 10 years or more. And they also found that people talked about factors outside of job embeddedness. So they talked about having this strong commitment to social work and really identifying with the job that they do, having a positive and this sort of challenge-oriented perspective. So kind of this idea of rising up to the challenge, And they also had a lot of social support and autonomy within their jobs. So kind of they felt like they were trusted and had the ability to do things and make decisions on the job. So one thing to note, though, is that this study was done in Ireland and focused only on social workers, and all of them were working for this kind of single state-run agency of about 5,000 employees. So this one might not translate as well to our service system here within the US. So we wanted to kind of do another study on stairs and why people stay in our particular community mental health settings here in the US. So that kind of brings me to the project that I've been working on. And so this project is sort of a sub-analysis of a larger project. And the larger project is run by the principal investigator, Sadaki Fukui. And basically what he's looking at is developing data-driven management system using machine learning to predict job turnover among mental health professionals. So basically what he's trying to do is take HR data from different mental health organizations, run it through the computer, which creates an algorithm that predicts people who are at risk of turning over in that organization. And basically by targeting, maybe doing some targeting intervention work with those people, maybe trying to do to reduce their likelihood of turning over at the organization. But anyway, so my study is kind of a sub-analysis of this larger study. And what we did was we identified extreme stayers in one behavioral health center in the Midwest. And so we defined extreme stayers as about 1 standard deviation above the average tenure at the agency, which turned out to be about 14 years or more. And so we invited everyone who had 14 years or more experience at this particular mental health agency to complete an interview via Zoom. And it's also important to note that this study began kind of as the pandemic started. So that was definitely something to keep in mind when we go through kind of the context of what people were saying in these interviews. So for our sample, we had 23 eligible and 13 agreed to participate. Now, when we're comparing the eligible participants, so those 23 eligible stayers within the organization, to the remaining employees of the organization, those stayers were more likely to be white men with exempt jobs. So these were salaried, executive, or professionalized jobs. However, our particular sample, so the 13 people, was pretty split evenly between men and women. However, it was still predominantly white with predominantly exempt jobs. So that is something that we'll definitely come back to later and kind of discuss. So basically what we did was either Michelle, my mentor, or me set up interviews with these individuals. They were about 45 minutes over Zoom. And we asked them semi-structured questions. So we started with kind of like this grand tour question, asking them about their role in the agency and what they did. And then we talked about why they think they've stayed for so long. And then we asked them, were there ever times when you considered leaving? What happened? And sort of what helped you stay during those times? We recorded and made summary notes, and then we transcribed those interviews and coded them using emergent thematic analysis, which basically means looking for common themes throughout the interviews on why people stayed. And then we also conducted member checking. So we presented those common themes back to focus groups to kind of get their opinion on things within the agency. So why did they stay? What did we find? So we found that people stayed at their organization. Reasons for staying can be categorized into kind of these 4 broader topics. And as I go over them, it's important to note that while we present them in 4 distinct categories, these are all kind of interrelated and connected. So in order to have one, the presence of the other might be necessary. So we have passion, support, opportunities, and personal attributes. So starting with passion, and you can see some of the relevant quotes from the interviews in these little quote bubbles. But one recurring theme across stayer interviews was their description of their work as their passion, whether it be for their job itself, the mission of the agency, or the person served. And this may kind of exemplify fit in job embeddedness theory, right? So they feel that their job is highly compatible with their values in life. It also fits with literature on work callings, which basically states that sometimes people feel a sense of purpose or meaning from their work. And I think this is particularly relevant in individuals in healthcare. So we feel a great sense of meaning from helping others, which is why we feel called to the field. And interestingly, work callings have been associated with a number of positive outcomes, such as job performance and reduced turnover. Additionally, stayers often mentioned their passion for the mission of the overall agency. So this agency had a person-centered kind of recovery-oriented model, and people were really passionate about this. And so research on mission attachment indicates that kind of nonprofit organizations tend to use their mission as a tool to sort of motivate their employees and highlight the overall goals of the agency. And so as you can see reflected in these quotes, one person stated, "I stayed primarily because all in all, I'm really passionate about the vision and the mission of the agency. The people that we serve and the services that we provide, I think are so very important. And I think by and large, our agency does it best." So this person really is encapsulating all of it, right? Their passion for the job, the mission, and the person served. Oops. So the second theme that we found was support. And by support, I mean mostly relationships within the organization. So stayers often describe their colleagues as friends, comrades, or family. They discuss going through difficult times together and forming strong bonds. And this may exemplify links in job embeddedness theory, right? So forming those social relationships within your job. And additionally, having supportive relationships, particularly with supervisors, created an environment of trust and feeling heard by that supervisor. So when you have a positive relationship with your supervisor, this kind of fosters this trust where you feel like your supervisor trusts you to do the things that need to be done and that they're listening to you. So, while having supportive relationships at work is not unique to the mental health workforce, the overall mission of the agency, so this patient-centered care model, may have created an environment in which supportive relationships flourish. So, for example, many stayers discuss kind of this camaraderie that formed when they were all working towards a common goal, which was often voiced as kind of the overall mission of the agency. So the third theme, opportunities for growth, and this could be in terms of personal growth, but also promotions or the ability to craft their own job within the agency or new tasks within the same job position. And this was often connected with job autonomy and flexibility. So often stayers discuss being granted the opportunity to be innovative or to make meaningful change within the agency, or having the opportunity to have a voice in the agency. And like I mentioned previously, this is often tied up into having supportive relationships with supervisor and leadership so that supervisors and leadership can grant these opportunities. And then lastly, we talked about personal attributes and values. So some stayers really felt like there were certain things about their personality that helped them stay at the organization for a long time. So they discussed things like having a laid back, appreciative style, so kind of being strength-based and looking at small wins with their clients within the job. You know, oftentimes in clinical work, it may be really hard to kind of see the positive or see the larger wins, but kind of quantifying wins into much smaller things can be helpful for these. And that's what some of the stayers talked about. And then also, previous research has indicated that certain personality traits like conscientiousness and proactiveness may be associated with reduced turnover and increased job embeddedness. Additionally, some people said they just really don't like change and they just value stability and a sense of security within their job. And this also may be reflected in part generationally. So, as you can see in one of those quotes there, some stayers kind of talked about how there has been a kind of change in how um, people switch around jobs and what's considered acceptable in moving jobs and how long you have to stay at a job. So they stated, when they were younger, having the same job for a long time was valued, but now in our culture, maybe it's not as important. So maybe gaining more experience is more important. So maybe when you're in the hiring process and they've seen that you've kind of moved around, it's not as a big of a red flag as it was back in the day. So that is what we mean by personal attributes and values. So next, I want to kind of talk about the times when stayers consider leaving and kind of what helped them stay during those times. So we've all had times when we considered leaving an organization, and people in job embeddedness theory would label these as shocks to the system. So this basically means that there's something that happens that makes you consider leaving your job. And these are kind of pivotal points in your career. So whether that be something personal that happens, like something with your health or family, or maybe you develop new interests or a shift in values that is no longer compatible with the work that you're doing. Or it could be, work related. So maybe you're assigned new job tasks that you don't like, or you have a new supervisor that isn't working for you. Mergers can be really stressful, or different moves within the workforce. But oftentimes during these times, during these shocks, employees are looking for and comparing their opportunities and sort of weighing their pros and cons. And so we wanted to kind of know the stayers' experience of what kind of happened during those times and what ultimately led them to stay at the organization. And so what we found was not all that different from the themes that we found previously and why people stayed in general. However, ultimately, the key ones that they brought up in these times were relationships and opportunities. So in times when they considered leaving, a lot of stayers really discussed this sense of responsibility to the people that they were serving and the people that they worked with. So during hard times, they felt like this connection that really helped them stay, and being able to talk about these issues and feeling like they were understood and heard. And these are a few quotes related to that. One of these quotes at the bottom, one person talked about some difficulties that they had with their own mental health and how coworkers were very supportive of them during that time. And they kind of had this sense of feeling valued and connected. So relationships tended to be one thing that really helped individuals stay even during trying times. And then lastly, opportunities was another one. So oftentimes people would be unhappy with their work situation at the organization, and then suddenly a new opportunity would arise at the organization that helps them stay. And one of that quote there says Deus ex machina, and I didn't know what that was, so I had to look it up. But really, that is that term is used in storytelling when a character feels like they're in a situation that they can't get out of, and then it's solved magically in an unexpected way. So this person felt like they felt trapped, or they felt like they couldn't get out of a situation at work that they really didn't like. And then all of a sudden they were offered a new job opportunity within the organization that kind of fixed that problem. So having those types of opportunities in your organization can help people stay. And then also the second person kind of talked about having leadership training and how that helps them grow in their position, and feeling respected, and just kind of having those opportunities to grow within their position, which kind of helps them stay. So now that we've kind of talked about our results from that study, I wanted to kind of talk more about some practical implications for what we can do within our organizations to help with employee retention. So regarding that passion element that we found, so it may be important to look for this during the selection and recruitment phase of applicants at your organization. So ask applicants about their passion and what brings them there to work, and really considering, do these things really align with the mission of the agency and what we're doing here? We can also foster passion within the agency. So sometimes people are right out of school and not sure what they want to do, but they think it might be a good fit. But you can foster a sense of passion by making sure that your organization's values are clear and that you're sharing them in meetings and you're sharing the mission of the agency. And not only that you're sharing them, but you're also acting accordingly to them. And so this can be done, talking about it in meetings or having posters on the wall. But again, you want to make sure that you're acting accordingly to those things and not, having these conflicting arguments. But you also, another thing that you can do is talk about like the success stories that that team members have working with clients or within their job positions. So whether this mean, coworkers having time to talk about their successes or having clients come back and sharing their success stories. This is often used in the Breathe burnout intervention that I mentioned earlier, where employees are asked to kind of connect back to their why. So basically what that means is they're encouraged to reflect and discuss what drew them into the profession in the first place and what's most important to them about their work. So kind of giving them that time to reflect back on why they came in the first place, what is important to them, and how is that aligning with the overall mission of the agency and their job. But as I go through these different categories and kind of these practical implications, I invite you to share in the chat maybe your ideas related to these. If you have additional ideas of how you may foster employee retention related to these categories, feel free to share them in the chat. Let's see, and make sure the chat is available. There we go. All right, so moving on. So for support, so talking about supportive relationships, it's important that organizations, actually grant time and spend time nurturing relationships within the organization. And this is really like those links in the job embeddedness theory. So whether that be, spending time to get to know each other during meetings or having, lunch, coffee, social gatherings. In the pandemic times, having these Zoom get-togethers, oftentimes my lab would have like a Zoom game night where we played games virtually, or we like challenged another lab to play games. And so offering these ways for employees to get to know each other and foster these relationships can be really important. Also, additionally, training for supervisors related to sort of these person-centered supervision practices. So making sure individuals feel like they fit within the agency. Sadaki Fukui does a lot of research on person-centered supervision and client-centered supervision. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I can kind of direct you to some of his research that he does. And then also, supporting autonomy. So allowing employees to feel like they are trusted to do their job and feel like they are able to be creative within their job and make decisions. Sometimes it may be difficult for supervisors kind of let go and delegate tasks, but it's really kind of learning about how do we help to encourage autonomy supporting environments. And there's actually research on training programs to help supervisors foster these autonomy supporting environments. So for opportunities, so it's important to review opportunities for promotion within your organization, not from just the employee, but also on the supervisor's part, so that they know the different opportunities available for their employees. And then also consider different levels of the same job. So maybe the next step is being a supervisor, but you don't really want to take on that supervisory role. So maybe there's something that you can do or opportunities for advancement within your role, as well as taking on new tasks within your role. And also making sure that, there's support for people who want to take on those new opportunities. So are there trainings available? Is there support for people learning new skills? Again, making sure that there is autonomy support for creative solutions from staff. And then also, this kind of connects with this idea of job crafting, which basically refers to employees shaping their job to kind of better align with their interests and preferences and needs. And some of these behaviors are things like changing job tasks or changing the quality or number of relationships at work, or changing their perceptions about their job. So these behaviors can actually be promoted through giving the employees a sense of freedom and autonomy to do their job as they see fit. So autonomy supporting environments can also kind of foster these job crafting behaviors, which in turn could potentially help with employee retention. And there's also interventions that foster job crafting, such as proactive goal setting with the employee and supervisor. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about, in terms of the different categories that we've talked about, personal traits. So this may be something to consider when you are selecting for fit within the job. One person from the stayer interviews talked about feeling like it was a blue jean and sneaker kind of crowd. So that kind of just means, depending on the type of work you're doing, there might be a certain culture to the workplace that you want to make sure this person's okay with or accepting of. Also, in terms of the values of the agency, is this person willing to accept kind of this recovery-oriented model? We also can train people to have the types of traits needed for the job. So we can train people on effective stress management and motivational interviewing, and having difficult conversations. So kind of training people to be better equipped for the job at hand. So I also wanted to talk about the use of the stay interview, which is effectively kind of what we did during our interviews for the study. We asked people, why they've stayed at the organization for so long. And that's kind of basically what the stay interview is. And so companies are beginning to integrate stay interviewers or interviews for employees. And this has been found to be a beneficial tool in retaining existing employees compared to exit surveys, which kind of retrospectively investigate what they could have done better when the employee has already decided to leave. Whereas stay interviews are looking at employees who are currently at the organization and what can they do to help them stay. And so we kind of saw firsthand in our study how asking individuals why they stayed elicited useful strategies that the agency could then implement to help with retention. And so while, we may be a little reluctant or it may be challenging to elicit honest responses from employees that are currently at the agency, because maybe employees may feel uncomfortable answering some of these questions, there are some recommended steps in the literature about setting up, conducting, and creating solutions from stay interviews. And this one book by Richard Finnegan is just one example of those. But he basically has a lot of suggestions on how you might do this. He suggests doing a top-down approach, which basically means starting at leadership, the leadership doing stay interviews with the people below them, those people doing stay interviews with the people below them, and so on until you get to kind of the frontline individuals at the organization. It's also important that these interviews are one-on-one. They're not like a group interview to kind of make people feel more comfortable about being honest about their work situation. And it's also really important to note that this is not a performance review. So you want to make sure employees understand the purpose of the stay interview, and that it's to generate possible action steps that would strengthen their engagement and work well-being and help them stay at the agency. And by communicating this to them, you're also kind of conveying this message that they're valued employees and that the agency would like to continue to have them. Some example questions as stay interviews could be, what do you like most and least about working here? What are your career goals? Why do you stay at this organization? And so a lot of supervisors may feel hesitant about asking employees these questions because they think, oh, what if they bring something up that I can't immediately address? I think it also speaks volumes for employees just to have that time, that willingness, that supervisors have that willingness to listen and work towards a solution, even if it's not a perfect solution. So you can do things like create stay plans with your employees, which is like a list of goals and tasks to reach those goals that would help the individual kind of feel like they are growing within their position, if that's something that they're looking for. It's also important that employees and supervisors consider available opportunities both in-house and beyond that may align with the employee's career goals and passions. So lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the limitations of our research on this. So like I mentioned previously, we talked to mostly white people in leadership positions. So people of color at the organization were not only less likely to respond to invitations to participate in this research, but they were also less likely just to be in the stayer group in general. And so we are currently kind of looking into this and kind of trying to see what's going on at this organization. And this may show an equity concern within this organization. So were these individuals less likely to be hired or promoted? Is there kind of this leaky pipeline situation going on created by like structural racism? Maybe they got into the field but weren't being promoted, so they left and they kind of leaked out of the field. Or maybe it's reflective of this historical effect, right? So we interviewed people who were hired, at least 14 years ago, some even 30 years ago. Maybe back then, hiring a diverse workforce was not focused on within the agency as much as it is today. So we're currently working on a second round of interviews, specifically looking at Black stayers and who've been there for longer and kind of see what their experience is like at the agency and why they might have stayed and what their experience is like. And so other things to consider, cultural shifts. So thinking about how the pandemic may have affected these people's responses. So they may have been rethinking their priorities in those moments. So having, thinking about a passion shift or new opportunities that weren't there previous to the pandemic. Also thinking about valuing relationships more just because they had been in social or quarantine for a while. It's important to kind of consider how things are changing within the workforce pre and post pandemic. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, there might be differences in the types of stayers within your organization. Some stayers may be enthusiastically staying and super excited, and then other stayers may be more reluctant. And so really, future research is needed to kind of understand, like, what are the differences between these types of stayers? So that is all I have in terms of what I want to share with you. I did want to kind of ask you to share in the chat, maybe kind of think about something that you could apply from today's breakout session, bring back to your organization to kind of to see any ideas that people may have in terms of increasing employee retention at your organization, or maybe even things that may help you stay at your organization. So if you could just share something like that in the chat, I'd love to see your responses. And while people are kind of doing that, I'd also love to take any questions that anyone has.
Out of curiosity, was there any plans or did you guys have the opportunity to interview kind of people at all different stages of employment to see if some of the reasons why people that had been there 14 years are staying are, much different than the reason why someone who's been there 3 or 4 years is still staying there?
Yeah, that's a great question. In this particular study, we just looked at people who were staying for 14 years or more. So we kind of wanted to look at, what made people stay at the organization for a really long time. But I imagine it would be quite different in terms of why people stay and, when they're only 3 or 4 years along. I do know there's like a second part of the study that I helped with interviews for, and we asked people who were had less time at the agency. So maybe people who are even just starting out, and we asked them, why do you continue to stay at the agency? And we got a lot of people just kind of saying, well, I want to give it at least 6 months to kind of try it out and kind of see, like, nothing's bad has happened so far, but I still want to kind of try it out and get my bearings. So depending upon the stage of your career within the agency, I imagine there would be a lot of difference between why people stay, for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions or ideas that people have that you thought of in terms of helping with employee retention at your agency or organization? Yeah, I really like asking their employees their why of why they do this. I recently participated in kind of like a breathe intervention with the clinical students in my program, and it was actually very empowering to kind of to discuss, why did you go into this field in the first place? And we're all, relatively early in our careers. So it definitely helps kind of connect you back to what's important to you and reminds you of those things, which can often get lost in the day-to-day paperwork and struggles and those types of things. Let's see, we have a question in the chat. What do you think are the systems related factors versus individual factors that help people stay? Yeah, so this was kind of getting at, there are some individual factors in terms of, personality traits, and also, people knowing their opportunities within the organization, maybe their frustration tolerance, and also how they conceptualize, working with clients and the small wins that they have. So there's, those individual things that are helpful, but I think a lot of it is, systems related factors in terms of, supervisors, at least at the supervisor level, granting them opportunities to, have autonomy within their job, granting them opportunities for them to feel heard within their job, so that if there is any issues that come up, they feel comfortable going to their supervisor, granting opportunities for growth either within their position or moving up within the agency. All of those things I think I would categorize within, kind of more systems or related factors. And, you can foster, passion, and you can help people with effective stress management. So even though someone may be kind of struggling with those things, that doesn't mean they're not a good fit for the organization. Let's see. Did you see much employee feedback on workloads? So yeah, so this often came up in terms of when people talked about like times when they considered leaving. I remember a few people talking about their caseload got really high, and it was very difficult to manage. And they ultimately decided to stay because they had resources within the organization that helped with burnout, and their supervisors were encouraging of helping them to take time off and to kind of take care of themselves in those times. But yeah, there were times when people talked about workload as being a factor in terms of what helped them or what made their work more difficult and kind of made them to consider leaving. We did focus most on the interviews of factors that help them stay, though. So we didn't really talk much about those types of things, but I imagine those would come up a lot in things like exit interviews and things like that. Anything else? Well, we have about a couple minutes left. So I did want to just share my email with you all in case any questions come up. I'm not, the expert of experts by all means, but I can definitely try to answer as best I can or direct you to someone who can answer. So please feel free to contact me with any questions, or if you'd like to have copies of any papers that I talked about today. My paper that I'm working on isn't published yet, but working on that. But yeah, so just be on the lookout for that. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for joining us, Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. I really enjoy sharing these types of things, and hopefully something I said today will help you guys.
Thank you so much. For everybody, thank you for coming to the summit today. We pick back up tomorrow with our keynote starting at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. So other than that, if there weren't any other questions, hope everybody enjoys their afternoon.
Great, bye guys.